All you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second TED Talk series. This is an initiative by EcoSeas Caribbean to promote information sharing within our network and hopefully manifest some concrete actions going forward using collaborative measures. I think that it's important that as persons who are passionate or just interested in the marine environment, that we promote some conversations amongst ourselves and also establish strategies to develop regional initiatives because it's one Caribbean at the end of the day. So with that being said, here on the call with us is Khadija, the regional coordinator. Khadija, I don't know if you want to say anything before we jump into or introducing our presenter.
Hello, hi, good night. How everybody feeling and doing? I just finished exercising. My blood is pumping, and I'm ready to learn more from Hannah. That's about it from me.
Good. I know. I mean, I would say put ones in the chat, but I don't think that we want to have that much energy. But I would just encourage everybody to as Hannah goes through her presentation, feel free to put any comments that you may have or questions in the chat. So without further ado, I will just hand over to Hannah. She'll introduce herself and her work and take us on a journey about corals. So Hannah, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Travis and Khadija, for this opportunity to represent EcoSeas. I am Hannah Lochan. I'm a research officer at the Institute of Marine Affairs based in Trinidad and Tobago. And today I just want to take you through what's going on in Tobago's reefs and efforts for restoration that IMA has undergone and is undergoing right now. So before we begin, I would just like you to close your eyes and, picture what an ideal coral reef looks like to you. If you had to go diving right now, what would you like to see? What do you think would make a really fantastic reef? And in this, I bet you pictured a lot of huge, big corals making a really pretty seascape on the reef. I'm sure you pictured lots of fish and most likely a lot of marine megafauna. So we have dolphins, we have manta rays, we have sharks, we have all these amazing animals that we really need to make healthy coral reefs. However, what happens is that this is actually the reality of a lot of the reefs, not just in Tobago, but in the Caribbean on the whole. So we have a lot of turf algae taking over, we have a lot of coral mortality and not much new corals being formed. We have a lot of soft corals growing on the reef, and while those look pretty, they just don't have the same structural integrity as the big brain corals, as the big branching corals have. And that is the change in our seascape, in our coral reef seascape, is a really big one in the Caribbean. So we're just going to touch on what is a coral. So a coral is actually an animal. So it's made up of many, many, many polyps. And each polyp has its own little mouth, it has its own digestive sac, and it has tentacles that allow it to feed. And in these tentacles, there are also stinging cells. So corals are actually able to sting their prey. Some corals might sting more than others. So you have the fire coral that can give a really nasty sting and actually leave scars. And you have some other corals where you mightn't even feel it. But they do have their defense response. You also have little tiny algae, plant algae that live inside the coral tissue that give it its color. So this is how the corals get majority of their food. So these tiny plants, tiny microalgae inside the coral tissue photosynthesize. And the sugars from this photosynthesis process provides 90% of the food for the coral. So while corals can use their tentacles and they do feed in the night, and they'll feed on worms, they'll feed on zooplankton in the water, majority of their food comes from this symbiotic relationship with the tiny algae, also known as zooxanthellae. So as corals are animals, we know they grow, they respire, and they also reproduce. So one main way that corals reproduce is through something called broadcast spawning. So this is where you have different corals releasing their bundles of egg and sperm into the water column. So you'd have and this happens usually for different species. You'd have the same species spawning on the same night, and this is called synchronous spawning. So you want all your species spawning on the same night so that you maximize the amount of eggs and sperm in the water, and you maximize the amount of fertilization that can take place. And broadcast spawning is really important because it allows for increased genetic diversity. So we have siblings, we have parents, we have a whole family, and we are not completely clones or completely identical to anyone in our family. We all have different genetic traits that make us special. And this is also the case with corals. So you will have different larvae being formed from eggs and sperm from the parents. And you might have this green larvae. He might be more resistant to disease. And this purple larvae might settle and he might be more resistant to high temperatures. And this is what is really critical for reefs, is building the genetic diversity and the genetic resilience. So we have the parents that release the bundles of egg and sperm into the water column. You have fertilization, so you have the development of embryos, these develop into larvae, and gradually these larvae then settle on the reef and become permanent polyps, and they grow into what we see here. We also have asexual reproduction. So this is where you have a clone of the coral. So we have this branching coral, and this commonly occurs in branching corals. So in Mount Irvin, if you have snorkeled in Tobago and you've snorkeled at Mount Irvin, that whole reef flat is full of these really beautiful orange, golden branching corals. And these corals have adapted to living in these surge-prone areas. So when pieces of this coral break off, it actually can reestablish itself and continue growing. Granted, it doesn't get smothered by sand. So if you have this parent colony here and a little piece gets broken off and it is able to attach itself to the substrate, you can actually have this new piece growing into a much larger colony. However, it's important to note that while this is great that we can have faster reproduction, faster coral growth, you have to acknowledge the fact that these corals are all the same. So any disturbance, any disease, any stress that causes this colony to die is going to cause this colony to die, granted it's in the same area. So that's why broadcast spawning is so important, and sexually based strategies of restoration are really key. So we have coral reefs all around Tobago. So Tobago is right here, northeast of Trinidad, of South America. And we all know of the Buku Reef Complex. So we have Bonaccord Lagoon, and we have outer and western Buku Reef in Southwest. We have reefs along the Atlantic coast. Honestly, I've never dived here. It's a little hairy, a little more treacherous. It's pretty rough. And we have reefs up in Speyside and around Charlottesville. We also have coming down by Culloden and Castara. And diving on the Caribbean side is a lot easier than on the Atlantic, especially with the currents. So we know we have corals around Tobago, and in 2010, prior to the big bleaching event that caused a lot of coral reef loss, IMA actually began its long-term monitoring. So there are two colors I'd like you to pay attention to. It's this green, this kind of turquoise green, and the yellow. So these are just two sites as an example. So as you can see for Buku, for the hard coral, the turquoise color, in 2010, we had about 40% coral cover, and turf algae was also high, but hard coral was still higher. As you can see, after this mass bleaching event, we have coral decline to less than 20% in 2 years, and that's a big loss. And what we see now is that there's no real recovery. It's pretty much stabilized. There's no more significant loss. There's no more significant gain, but it's pretty much at around 15 to 18% coral cover at sites around Tobago. What you can see though is that turf algae actually is still very high. So turf algae is now at most of the sites around Tobago is now the dominant benthic organism. And benthic organism just means what grows on the reef. So instead of having lots of big
Is it my internet or is Hannah frozen? All right, well, I think we lost her.
Oh no, looks like we lost Hannah. Intermission, guys.
I'm sure she'll rejoin. You can shoot her a quick message or call and ask her what's going on. We were now getting into the conversation. Let me see what's in the chat. Oh, yeah, it's Hannah. I'm sure she's probably panicking, knowing how she is. What I'm hoping, oh, here she is.
She's back. Hopefully. Okay, yeah. Um, you know how technology is.
I was just like, did Karan go? Because
So sorry, I was talking. I didn't even know. Oh my gosh, so I don't know. Can y'all tell me where you saw up to?
um oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You
Okay,
were
So it
talking
was the
about the algae, the turf algae, and that's like the
okay,
reality
so
of
it's
Tobago
almost
right
okay.
now.
That's great.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, let me.
Yes, right here.
Okay, great. Sorry, let me. Right. So I was saying, right. So as we can say, right. So I had mentioned 2010, we had high coral cover, and then we had that huge bleaching event. We got a huge coral loss, and coral loss. The coral cover has now stabilized at around 18 to 20%. So that's on the lower end of a healthy reef. You ideally want a higher coral cover. And like I was saying, the turf algae that covers the reef that we see a lot in Tobago, and this is also from pollution, nutrient pollution, and just high nutrients in our water reduces the space for coral settlement. So this is also something that we see in Tobago. When we go diving, we don't really see baby small corals. So a juvenile coral is considered 5 centimeters and less, and we do not see that many of those on the reef. And if you want to improve your coral reefs, if you want to build and have new generations, what you need is you need babies on your reef. You need new colonies forming that can continue the progression and continue the coral growth and the services that corals provide. So climate change and coral bleaching. So coral bleaching, if y'all remember, I mentioned that we have the symbiotic relationship between coral, between the coral and the little algae that live inside them. However, so when temperatures get really high, this relationship actually does not work anymore. So the zooxanthellae are expelled from the coral. So when the coral has lost not only its color that it gets from the zooxanthellae, it's lost its main food source. So as you can see, this coral here, my laser pointer is not working. Right. So this coral, it looks white. And it looks white because it doesn't have its zooxanthellae, and the calcium carbonate skeleton of the coral is now visible. So this happens when temperature, so for Trinidad and Tobago, the coral bleaching threshold is about 29.4 degrees Celsius. So we know that if temperatures persist above 29.4 for days to weeks, that we can expect to see coral bleaching on our reefs. Corals can recover. So coral bleaching doesn't mean that the coral is dead. It doesn't mean that it's going to die. Corals can recover from bleaching. However, the fact is that they are a lot more stressed. And what happens is that they can regain their zooxanthellae, they can regain this algae inside of them and continue, which will continue feeding them. What granted that the temperatures go back down. But what happens is that if you're stressed, if you go to work, you don't sleep well, you don't exercise, you don't eat well, the chances of you getting sick increase. And this is basically what happens with corals. So you often can see disease outbreaks after bleaching events. And just on the left-hand side, this is an example of what a healthy brain coral would look like. And on the right-hand side is a bleached brain coral. And this is actually from 2010 surveys that IMA would have done. So if you see this one here, and you can kind of see all around the picture, all the kind of white. It's a lot of coral bleaching in this picture. Given with respect to climate change, we know that we expect that these bleaching events are going to get more frequent and more severe as temperatures increase. This graph is from NOAA, so the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They do a lot of work in tracking global sea temperatures and using this data to put it into regional products. So they will provide this data to Trinidad and Tobago, to regions, to understand what's going on in our backyard. And they will send us alerts. So they'll say, hey, you guys have been at high sea surface temperatures for weeks now. You are now at an alert bleaching level 1 or an alert bleaching level 2. Right now, Tobago is at an alert bleaching level 2. This means that we have had bleaching for weeks. We are at 20-degree heating weeks and more. As you can see here, this black line is actually sea surface temperature for 2024. And you can see it's the highest one. So last year in 2023, we did have NOAA announce a global mass bleaching event. And I'm not sure how well you can see the gray line, but you can see it along here. Currently, 2024, the black line is even higher. It's even higher than the temperatures that we had last year. So we have corals that are now bleaching again on the heels of a mass bleaching event that occurred in 2023. And this is really stressful because we recognize the amount of stress that our corals are under and the amount of mortality that we can expect. So in 2023, we monitored 6 sites around Tobago. We observed bleaching at all sites, and the highest bleaching was observed in Charlottesville. And we also observed the bleaching and mortality of giant barrel sponges as well, and bleaching in mountainous star corals, brain corals, and we also observed some disease. So this disease here is dark spot disease on the star coral. So it's not all gloom, but it is just the fact that we need to monitor, we need to understand the stress that is ongoing on our coral reefs. And like I said, corals that have bleached do have a higher susceptibility to disease and also have a lower reproductive capacity. So when you're stressed, you might not be able to do what you do. You have a certain amount of energy. If on a normal day, you would go for a run in the morning and you'll go for a run in the evening, when you're stressed and you're sick, you likely can't do that. You need to conserve your energy, and that's what corals do. So they need the energy to survive, and basically some other factors are limited. So oftentimes they have a lower reproductive capacity and they don't spawn as much or as frequently when they've been that stressed. So that again is a problem. So if we don't have young coral juveniles on our reef and then our older corals are not spawning, it puts us in an even more difficult situation. So not to add more more disaster and stress, but there is a looming threat for Tobago's reefs. So stony coral tissue loss disease is a coral disease that has significantly impacted other regions in the Caribbean. So Florida, Bahamas, Cuba, all these areas, even in the Lesser Antilles, have really been impacted by this disease. So this is a it's a bacteria, and it is extremely virulent and it's highly transmissible. So once a coral gets infected, it can be dead within a few days to a few months. So, and these are two examples of corals in Bahamas, and you could see the progression over a month period of the disease impact on the coral. So within this month, this brain coral had died. And this, I mean, we do have coral disease that exists, like in the previous picture that I showed you, but it's not that as transmissible and it's not as virulent as this stony coral tissue loss disease. And what happens is that the types of corals that we have on our reef are the corals that are highly susceptible to mortality from stony coral tissue loss disease. So IMA is working on getting training in identifying and treating and managing this disease. And we aim to pass on this training to marine resource users and management in Tobago, and also just build awareness of this disease. So if you go snorkeling and you see something that doesn't look right, you can take a picture, you can always shoot Anthony or I an email, a message, and just let us know what you saw, where you saw it, and then we can go investigate, because we're not in the reef all the time. And though it might also look like bleaching, but the difference is that stony coral tissue loss disease will actually occur in it'll look like lesions all over the coral. And the rate of tissue loss is really one of the biggest factors in knowing that it is infected with stony coral tissue loss disease. And this, for Tobago, especially in the Northeast, we have huge brain corals that make the most beautiful reefs. If anyone has been diving Northeast Tobago, I mean, I know some sites by St. Giles Rock, Sanger Rock, they huge corals, especially the largest brain coral, one of the largest brain corals in the Western Hemisphere that we do have in Speyside is a brain coral, and that is one of these species that's highly susceptible. So IMA is really on the lookout. We want to build as much capacity and awareness on this as possible. And this is just a little map to show you the areas that have been affected. So Tobago is here. We don't have any data as yet. We have no confirmed sightings of stony coral tissue loss disease, but you can see all the red dots are where stony coral tissue loss disease has been confirmed. So Tobago is not special in that it is coming. It is just a matter of when are we going to get this disease, and we really need to be prepared. Right now, the closest island is Grenada that is impacted. So we are just continuously on the lookout, and in IMA's yearly monitoring, we do disease surveys, and we are also on the lookout for stony coral tissue loss disease. So what exactly is being done by IMA to try to enhance and restore reefs around Tobago? So in 2022, BPTT funded the Marine Project, and this was looking at the feasibility of restoring seagrasses and coral reefs around Tobago. And this pilot project was actually pretty successful. We were able to do detailed documentation of coral spawning for multiple species. And we were also able to do work with seagrass, investigate the capacity for seagrass restoration. And this culminated in the first version of the Guide to Restoration for Coral Reefs and Seagrasses around Tobago. And all of this is not just IMA, but we do work with the community, and a big goal of the Marine Project is to build ocean stewardship and to build capacity and resilience within communities to be able to manage what's in their own backyard. And after the pilot project, the Marine Project was funded for a further 5 years by BP Global. So I just want to show you, this is what coral spawning looks like. So this is a mountainous star coral. And as you can see, these little bundles that are being released the little pink or yellowish looking balls, these are all full of sperm and eggs. So what we'd have is tens or dozens of these mountainous star corals spawning at the same time. So basically, while you're diving, you're just swarmed by all of these bundles, and these bundles will float up into the water column, break up, and the eggs and sperm will be released. And ideally, what we want is high fertilization rates for new coral larvae to be formed. It really is honestly a magnificent species. This is one of the most dramatic species that spawns. Some species release some bundles at a time, but the mountainous star is really impressive. So with respect to restoration, IMA is working closely with SECOR International. So SECOR International is a lead global agency in not just coral restoration, but using coral seeding. So this is the process of using the reproductive strategies of the coral. So this restoration technique is designed to increase the coral cover using genetic diversity and using the breeding corals. So what we do is we actually collect, I'm sorry if it's a bit small. So we have a boulder brain that's spawning. So you can see the bundles being released from the coral. And we actually use a net. So we place a net over the coral while it's spawning. And this net, at the top of this net, there's a falcon tube. And since the bundles are buoyant, they actually float up the net and into the tube. And we would collect about 5 to 10 mils of coral gametes from the coral. We don't collect all, we don't need all. And what we then bring it all back to the boat. So if we go on a dive and everyone has nets, everyone will collect, and then we'll pull all the gametes that we collected together. And on the boat, there is a fertilization process. So basically, what's in these tubes, we just mix them all together. We want to maximize the genetic diversity, like I said. And we do some sperm dilutions. So there's a certain concentration of sperm that you need to have, or else you will end up with polyspermy. So polyspermy is basically just where you have too many sperms that fertilize one egg, and then you get an inviable embryo. So we just have it's just a little more lab work to do on the boat. And then we actually have our embryos forming. So as you can see, these are the coral embryos and they look like little popcorns. That's when you know that the embryogenesis has started and the cell divisions have begun. And these embryos then turn into larvae, swimming larvae. So I'm not sure how well you can see, but this one, for example, and this one, the larvae actually look a bit more elongated and they have gone through all their cell divisions and they're now swimming around and they're ready to find a home. What we do is we work with SECOR and we actually grow these larvae inside of a coral rearing in situ basin. So this is like a big pool that we have inside the water and it's meshed off. So nothing can get in, nothing can get out of the pool, but we do have water that can flow through to ensure that, yeah, there is water movement through the crib. And in these cribs, we also have special substrates, so special ceramic substrates that we want these larvae to settle on. And this is what it looks like when the larvae have settled. So it goes from they're swimming around, and then they're inside the crib and they settle on the seeding units. And you can see that they metamorphosize. So they're no longer moving, they're now in one stationary spot. And ideally what we want is for these babies to continue growing. And they grow on these seeding units, and the seeding units are designed in such a way that they can just be wedged into the reef. So we have these seeding units with baby corals growing on them. This last picture is just an example of a seeding unit. This is actually in Mexico. So we just began our trials in July, but this example from Mexico, these corals are a few years old. So that's the whole thing also with sexual-based restoration, is that it takes a long time. You have to have a long-term vision. This can take 10 years plus to see true results and see the corals really growing and growing to a capacity where they are giving back to the reef. So there is a lot of work that goes into it, but there's a lot of value in what is done. And for SECO, the ideal is that we have at least one baby coral growing on each seeding unit that is put back out onto the reef. So the IMA began this in July. We did this coral seeding process. We actually did it twice. It was more successful in July. In August, we did not get any settlements in the crib, and it's likely due to, well, we do think that the high temperatures did play a factor. There was also a lot more rainfall, and there are a lot more environmental factors that came into play in August. But also there's just a lot more research to do. It is new to us, and we are working with SECO just to understand Tobago. And the idea is that at the end of the 5-year project, we're going to be able to understand a lot better when we would have contributed to reef restoration, but we'd have a lot better understanding and best practice strategies for conducting restoration in Tobago. Some interesting news is that, so I mentioned we work with SECO International. So in 2023, during this global heat wave, SECO International actually observed that their baby corals that they raised using this process of assisted fertilization actually withstood heat stress better and had more resistance to coral bleaching. And this is actually an amazing realization in that a lot of Caribbean countries are working with SECO to build resilience using this methodology, and seeing this really gives a lot more impact into the work that we're doing. So we are hoping that this is also going to be the same for Tobago for when we do the monitoring of our outplants on the reef. So we also work with building the Marine Resilience Network. So we work with communities, with reef managers, divers, fishers, boaters, everyone related and interested in the marine environment for Tobago. And we want to build the empowerment of these persons, to sustain the marine resilience beyond the 5 years of the IMA's project. So the idea is not that IMA comes in and does this work, but we want to incorporate the community and really have a long-term goal for restoration and protection of Tobago's reefs. We also do get a lot of reports from persons within the Marine Resilience Network, such as divers, and this has been really helpful to us. That's how we realize how bad the bleaching is right now. So right now in Tobago, we've gotten many reports of high bleaching, a lot of bleaching, especially in Northeast Tobago and even in Buku. So IMA will likely do more assessments, but it's a bit disheartening. But when you do the restoration, it does add some hope to what we do. So there's a lot that we still need. We need governance. We need the political will, persons to want to protect our marine spaces. We have a lot of legislation. It's not that we don't have policies in place. We just need it to be enforced. We need to focus on resilience-based management and adaptive management. We don't know what disturbances are coming. We don't know what disturbances will happen, and we don't know how it will impact us. So we need to have a management in a way that, okay, this happened, this is how we adapt it, and this is how we move forward in protecting our coastal resources. Ideally, we need co-management of resources. So not just government, but we also have that communities are empowered to manage and understand the value of what they are protecting. We also need sustainable financing and, of course, stewardship and awareness. I know it's often that, yes, it is these big companies, it's these big countries that do have huge impacts on our climate and the changes that have happened, but even we can't give up on building awareness and building our own capacity to care about the environment. And I'll just end off with the wise words of Baba Dioum. So in the end, we will only conserve what we love. We will only love what we understand, and we will only understand what we are taught. So we do have the responsibility to continue learning and continue teaching the value and the importance of our environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm sure, well, you've taught a lot, so I hope hoping by the end or at the end of this session that we have a lot more lovers for coral reef and reef protection. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I take it that Hannah's been very thorough, but I do encourage you, if you haven't given it a thought already, to ask Hannah some questions. Feel free to raise your hands or place it in the chat. But in the interim, since I'm not seeing any hands or questions, I'll kick off the questions then by something that was mentioned really early on in the presentation regarding nutrient pollution. I know, well, a common feature across the entire region really is that a lot of our reefs are situated near rivers or outflow areas. And you mentioned nutrient pollution, so I'm just wondering from a clarification standpoint if the nutrient pollution is that coming from the water sources, or is it something else that's adding to the water coming into the ocean?
Yes, so Tobago is affected by the Orinoco River, by the Orinoco outputs. So that is one high source of nutrients around Tobago. But we also do have a lot of land-based sources of pollution. And there is not much management that goes into this. So the two just compound each other. And yes, the land-based sources of pollution are a big issue that we do need to try to manage a lot better. So we have the ICZM policy for Tobago that's recently been passed, and they're looking at ways and how we will be enforcing this.
It's a good point. I know we also have a similar policy in Barbados, so I'm hoping that across the region really that it becomes a standard practice that we go about developing
And
in a
I
more
know Barbados has a
intentional
really
way.
well established the coastal zone management unit.
Yeah.
I know, for sure.
Yes. And they're also part of the planning process. Which brings me to another point that I wanted to raise in terms of really looking at the political will for protection and what do you envisage that would look like, where we talk about not necessarily coastal or shoreline systems, but also out in the deeper waters as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. So IMA is a scientific advisory body. So a lot of the work that we do contributes to policy making, and it would be great if we could see a faster turnover of acceptance of these policies. So I know we have the High Seas Treaty, the BBNJ, that has been ratified. I know there's a race to ratify this treaty, and it does extend much deeper, much further past the coastal areas. So I do think that, yes, using the science as the evidence in really supporting the policies that are written, they exist, they are there, they are persons working on them, and to get politicians to really understand and get them to buy into the fact that so much of our economic value comes from the ocean, comes from our coastal resources, and we need to protect it. And I do think that in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, we do need to look past the 5 years of our political terms and look much further towards the future, look towards the next 50, 60 years of how we can protect our heritage and protect our legacy for our future children.
Oh, for sure. And we often have to think about the long term, often it's always just what's in front of us. And that mode of thinking has put us in several challenges before. Christian Kendall has a question regarding your point to sustainable financing. More so, how do we go about capturing the costs to support the enforcement without adding more to the taxpayers or pulling from another ministry? I think this more goes or straddles the line of sustainable financing and the whole point of co-management. So if you could share a bit more about that.
Yeah, so that is an area we do have to work on, and understanding, the value that comes from it, understanding the value of our resources, and understanding where the support is coming from, and building support in other areas that will continue the support for our restorations in the long term.
Yeah, I would just like to add here too, and we've seen, I would call it a success, Khadija, at the Alligator Head Foundation in Jamaica, where persons or fisherfolk who essentially live in the area also contribute to the protection or restoration of the coral complex within the Alligator Head Foundation. They also have a source of income through water sports and things like that. So it does require some creative strategies, but it's not impossible. And we really just need to sit and listen to each other when having conversations, because there's oftentimes conflicting egos or somebody saying, well, you know, my way or no way. So, see another question. Samuel asks,
Just now, Travis,
coral bleaching.
before the
Go ahead.
question, Amy had her hand up for a while now. So
Sorry. Oh, Amy?
Hi everyone. Hi Hannah. I came in a
Amy.
bit I came in a bit late, so I'm not sure if you touched on this, but the question I had, Travis also just kind of touched on it a bit, but I wanted to know like your thoughts on, you say that, you know, there's the regulations, they are written up. The issue is just to get them implemented and enforced, and not just enforced, but you know, people actually like following the rules per se. And we know that we all know the culture of Trinidad and Tobagonians. And with this area, the Boko Reef, how it provides it's not just a area that needs to be protected, it also provides, you know, resources and source of employment for other people, you know, jet skiers, your boat tours. So I was wondering about your thoughts on how feasible it would be to implement these conservation strategies in the area, and how do you think would be the best way, if it is that these people would get on board to, you know,
Yeah.
implementing these strategies?
No, I understand. So what we've had is, a change in Buku Reef, we've seen the change. It's a lot more party boat culture, that sort of thing, and that's what persons tend to go for. And we have to look at, the fact that it was allowed to change. These things happened. And we have these socioeconomics that come out of it, the persons that make money from certain things. And it's not about, well, yes, we have to implement, we also have to work with what is going on and work with the people. So again, yes, educating goes a long way, and that will be one of the biggest factors in encouraging persons to change perspectives and get them to try to understand the value of the environment, whether it is that they try to ensure that they do have some sort of educational part of it in their tour, in their party tour. And it's really just working with them, because they are the ones that rely on the resources, and they're the ones that are using it. And we need to really work with them to be able to build a more resilient Tobago. And I don't think it's going to work where we go and you shut down everything and you can't do this and you can't do that. Like, I don't think that is a great strategy, and that you more need to work with the community and get them to understand and just to try to change the perspectives. And that is a difficult, ongoing job.
Yeah, definitely. I don't envy you, but thank you.
Yeah. I think we often have this almost elitist approach when it comes to conservation, but it really does involve any and everybody in terms of users and what's so yeah, moving into our next question. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm missing any hands. Just check. Okay, no hands. So Samuel asks, are coral bleaching and stony tissue storing coral tissue loss disease also experienced in the reefs in other parts of the world? How have they dealt with it, and what can we learn from them? And how are we coping? So I want to actually jump in here, Hannah, before you do, to
Sure.
just say that, well, Hannah will speak a little bit more about the spread of stony coral tissue loss disease. But earlier this year, and really late last year, actually, there are a couple countries across the Caribbean region that were utilizing the antibiotic to defend against stony coral tissue loss disease. Some success, but not the most favorable results. But that's still an ongoing research area in terms of how to slow the spread, because as Hannah said, it was very virulent. And you know, the corals are in a very precarious situation, right across the board. So Hannah.
Yeah, no. So for coral bleaching, sadly that is a global issue. I mean, there are things that we should do. So there's the global issue of in high rising sea surface temperatures, but then there are things that we can do, for example, in Tobago with our localized threats. So localized threats are stresses to the reef that we actually have some control over with respect to management. So this refers to pollution, sedimentation, overfishing. So all these factors, while we cannot control the overall temperature of the water, we can try to alleviate some of the stresses that our corals face. And in the hopes that we might not be able to stop bleaching, but we can maybe reduce the stress in some ways. With respect to stony coral tissue loss disease, Travis is very right. They have been working with using antibiotic treatments. However, antibiotic treatments work when it's on a smaller scale. Once you have a mass outbreak on your reef, it's really hard to do the treatments, and also corals can be reinfected. So if you have a coral that's been treated with antibiotics for stony coral tissue loss disease and it recovered, it can get reinfected by skittle D. So it's not the most it's not the best long-term solution. One, they've also discovered that the spread of stony coral tissue loss disease is related to shipping. So we have transfer of the bacterial through ballast water. So when ships move from area to area, and a lot more regulations and implementation has been going on in ensuring that ballast water is dumped at the regulatory level and ensuring that it's not done too close to shore where we have our coral reefs. Because what they observe is that you actually do often see stony coral tissue loss disease starting the hotspot zones, the initial zones are close to ports. So all these factors, other countries, like for example, in Florida, there's actually a lot of work with actually removing the corals from the reef and keeping them ex situ in these really huge enclosures, in these tanks, to actually try to save some of the broodstock of what still exists on the reef. So a lot of it seems very drastic, and we hope that we don't actually reach there for Tobago. I mean, we can't say for sure, but we do know that some places have been really badly impacted. So, and like I had mentioned, IMA will be working on getting training and building awareness for stony coral tissue loss disease.
DJ, I see you.
Yeah, I just as Hannah was talking about that, I just remembered I was at a conference this week and they were talking about coral bleaching and all the threats that the coral reefs face, and then this intelligent businessman put up his hand and he was just like, why can't we just move the reefs? Let's just pick them up or and move it. Let's move it to colder areas. Let's move it to deeper waters. Let's move it to shallower waters. Let's just move these reefs all over the place because that's the solution. And I was so confused that that was his mind, his thought process. Like, but I just remember that as yeah,
Yeah,
as you
so
said,
it's not to, I mean, we can't move the reef per se, but there are, if you do have some valuable corals, if you have a reef that has significant loss, and you can save some of the colonies that are existing. And so what they actually do is they monitor for spawning in the lab. So that is also
Hannah,
how.
stop justifying this madness. Was not she was not saying to move it to a lab or to a
No, I
controlled
mean, no, not
environment.
move the reef, but you do at the end want to protect some of your brood stock because you do not want to lose everything. So there's a lot of work. There's also cryopreservation of sperm so that you have the sperm preserved and it's used. It can actually be used later down the road. There's a lot of research that's going on with respect to coral restoration.
That's good. But moving the reefs is not the answer.
As much as we would like to
Management.
think about it. I actually just want to share one thing before we start to wrap up. I just, yeah. Oh, okay. So are you guys seeing a GIF, GIF, depending on what you see?
No,
No?
I'm seeing Hannah's screen still.
Oh, wait. Okay. Take two.
Okay, Hannah, maybe if you stop sharing, then Travis will be able to show
But it
us
says I'm
his.
Yeah.
not sharing.
What? Then whose
Oh,
screen is
what?
this?
You're seeing? Oh, there.
No, Hannah, it's your screen. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
definitely still sharing.
Okay.
Let me stop it.
Okay,
All
so
right.
when I share, I see the option to share. I don't see anything that says stop sharing.
It's okay. I stopped sharing for you. You
Okay.
good. Travis, go.
Okay. Yeah. Um, since we are all about, is it sharing? Are you seeing
No, not yet.
a GIF? No? Okay. Take five, I guess. Shucks. Technology really does not want to play nicely today.
There we go.
Yay! Are you seeing a GIF right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a model that's generated by NOAA, looking at the coral reef watch. So this is over the past 30 days, maybe? Yeah, over the past 30 days. So Hannah mentioned very early on in her presentation about the alert levels. So on the right side is where we are, Eastern Caribbean. You can see it actually goes into dark purple, which is alert level 5. So I just raised this to also share that this product is available if you're interested in going and checking out the anomalies of sea surface temperature, or if there's any alert levels on where you are for the corals, because it might also explain or help you to explain in a very snapshot way what you might be seeing underwater. And as we can see, as we get closer to the current day, well, this goes as far as October 12th. But even so, this time of the year should be getting cooler, but we're seeing that the alert level is actually going a little warmer in terms of, or it reflects that there's a higher risk of bleaching as we get closer to October 12th. So just share that graphic so that you can, if you're not, or you are curious, you might go snorkeling and decide, that you might be interested in learning about what exactly is happening around you. That is an option. You can just type in NOAA Coral Reef Watch and it'll come right up. So on that note, Hannah, yeah, NOAA Coral Reef Watch. I'll put the link in the chat. So on that note, Hannah, I don't know, do you have any parting words for us? Any words of inspiration? Any hope that we can give to our little friends, the coral underwater?
I think it is important to always have hope. It is a difficult field to be in. You do see a lot that you don't want to see. You want to see healthy, happy reefs. It's not always the case, but I think if you didn't have hope, we would not be doing our jobs properly. We always have to try to make sure that we come up with solutions. We try to find ways to improve what is not doing so well. So I think the fact that we have the capacities to implement restoration, I think that that's a big help for the reef. Granted, we do need to monitor this restoration because restoration always doesn't always, it's not always successful. So we do have to monitor the success rate. But yeah, and I would say if you are in the ocean, if you are in the sea, and you can do some citizen science, submit reports, I mean, those are really valuable to agencies. If you're in Trinidad and Tobago and you are dive or snorkel in Tobago, feel free to send in reports to the IMAC app or email myself or Anjani, and we would gladly accept your report.
So thank you very much, Hannah, for sharing that. I also want to encourage persons to take citizen science very, very seriously. The agencies often depend on notification for or from the public to, get or advance any projects that they might have going on or in the pipeline. Before we go, I just want to share our feedback form. I just posted the link in the chat. If you could take about 2 minutes and just fill that out so we can gauge your perception of the TED Talk series. And if you have any suggestions for us going forward, that would be greatly appreciated. So I'll just give you like 2 minutes to kind of work on that. I would sing, but I'm no Celine Dion or Whitney Houston, so
No, please don't. Please don't. But yeah, we have the TED Talks every month, so look out for the next one coming in November. And and then I was gonna say, oh my God, and I forgot. What the hell? It wasn't just that. Ah, I don't remember, I don't remember. It's it's because it's midnight. I'm in London and it's midnight. So this is my dedication to making sure that we have this space for knowledge sharing. Oh, I
Yeah.
remember. Junior presentation and everything else, and I was just thinking, how it is EcoSeas Caribbean can get more involved in not just the raising awareness, but like in driving different campaigns to make sure that, like you said, there's a lot of localized threats to the coral reefs, and maybe we could develop a campaign that targets that specifically, as opposed to looking at the whole big thing
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it can be
starting.
overwhelming looking at the big picture. I think definitely we could, and that is a conversation we can have.
Yeah, and then how we could also get some of our members trained as well. Yeah. Funding is important, so you see where we get the funding from. But I feel like it will be good for us to do,
Yes.
especially since corals, they are our babies, and by our I mean Caribbean. That is something that is very much us. So it would be great if we have a campaign on saving and protecting our reefs and getting more people involved and not like attacking them in the process, but just getting them to
Yeah,
understand it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could work on
for
that for
sure.
2025. So
Yes.
I feel like,
Projects
Travis, it's
coming.
5 past the hour. I would like to go in my bed.
Yes. And that is really about it. So I just
But
want to thank.
it was supposed to now be starting.
I know. I messed up the time on Zoom. It would not happen again next month. And if you know
Right.
anybody that wanted to join or that missed it, or that you feel that would connect with Hannah's presentation, we will put all the presentations on YouTube. So look out for when we post it and feel free to share widely, because this is some very important information and we all need to be as informed as possible. Yeah.
All
So
right.
thank
Well, thank you
everybody
so
for
much.
coming.
Yeah,
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing. I think
You're
we've
welcome.
learned a lot. Lots of things to consider going forward. And we will be back in November with another TED Talks.
Great.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
All
Have a
right.
good
Bye,
night.
guys. Thank you.